Ready?
Yes.
Yeah, we're here at the Fox Den Wildlife Management Area in Middlefield. And my name's Tom Wansleben. I'm a habitat biologist here. And this project that we're looking around here at is a young forest focused habitat project. The reason that we focus on young forest or early successional habitat, which is a suite of what we would call part of our open habitats, is we work on managing these habitats because there's a suite of species, both animal and plant species, that require this young forest early successional habitat, and these species are in decline. Some of them are endangered, but a lot of them are just species that were once common but now are declining, and the reason that they are declining is because of a lack of habitat and a lack of management of these habitats on the landscape. The reason we are here is because past management on this particular wildlife management area has resulted in some really excellent, about 60 acres of young forest, mainly aspen and young northern hardwood habitat that supports a plethora of species that are in decline and game species. So species like mourning warbler, ruffed grouse, American woodcock, but also it really supports a lot of other species such as black bear, moose, white-tailed deer, and it adds an element of complexity to an otherwise mature forest. So the forest type here is mainly a northern hardwood type forest that you find in these higher elevations here in Massachusetts. And the three dominant species that you would find in the northern hardwoods are sugar maple, American beech, and yellow birch. Those are kind of what they would call the father, son, and holy ghost of the northern hardwoods forest. This area had been subject to quite a bit of different land use history, from pasturing of animals in the 19th century, some small row crops and farmland that was in here, and then as that was abandoned, successive levels of timber harvesting, more exploitive timber harvesting, so not like forest management where you're using forest management science to guide your management, but more of getting the most monetary value that you can out of the woods. So not really looking at kind of the long-term view of the forest itself. And so I'm in here develop this project to add more habitat for these young forest species. And the way that we kind of work with creating that habitat is these species need a really dense structure and a kind of a species composition that you only get when you're allowing a huge influx of sunlight to come in. And that's done by removing 75 to 90% of the forest canopy. And what that does is, as you remove that forest canopy, it's allocating resources to a whole new suite of plant species that can thrive in a full sunlight condition. So we have species that can grow in dense shade, but there's a lot of them that really need that influx of sunlight. And so by opening up that canopy, we get a big influx of sunlight that species such as aspen really thrive in that open sunlight, and all those resources are now reshifted to a whole suite of plants that are now going to come up in this really dense kind of thicket habitat that these species utilize. And that habitat is what we would call ephemeral. It only lasts a short period of time for these species, up to about 20 years. So we need to continually put that on the landscape in something that we would call patchwork mosaic. So we'll manage this area, and then in 15, 20 years we'll go to another patch and do that too. So we continually have this shifting patchwork mosaic of these young forest early successional habitat blocks or areas within context of a much larger mature forest. And so we're only looking at managing maybe 10 to 15% of our landscape in a young forest or open condition, while the rest 75%, 80% of the land will still be in this mature forest condition. And it's really about thinking about diversity of habitat to provide the full context, the full suite of attributes that wildlife need. And so in here, in the designing the project, I work a lot in understanding the natural natural community dynamics, the disturbance dynamics of these forested systems. So in here in northern hardwoods, the main natural disturbance dynamics are kind of a gap-based dynamics or single tree fall disturbance dynamics, where the regeneration of these stands is really dictated by, say a single tree falls and there's a little spot of sunlight, and species such as sugar maple and beech will take advantage of that new gap of sunlight and come up. Or you have a wind event that will knock down, say, a half acre, an acre of trees, and then you'll have regeneration come up in that. An ice storm event, which those can be even bigger, where those will break or kill the canopy of larger areas of the trees, and then you'll get a gap in there. And these are really variable over the landscape, so it creates a patchiness within that area that disturbance event takes place at. So you very rarely see a clear, uniform spread of, say, like a windstorm where everything gets knocked down. There's usually some trees that are left standing singly, some that are left in groups, some where the top is knocked off or they're broken in half and that will become a dead tree. And you usually have a preponderance of dead wood that's on the ground too. And that creates an ecological condition for certain plant species to take hold and come up. And we try to emulate that ecological condition by providing a lot of sunlight, by keeping trees in kind of variable places and variable types of trees, and providing a lot of dead wood in the form of downed tops, down logs, but also trying to retain all dead trees and snags on the landscape, and also keeping trees that are diseased that we know are eventually going to die, for that continuity of that dead wood to continue to progress on the landscape even after we're done managing the project. And so here, coming into this is 90% all northern hardwoods in here, but we do have these pockets of softwoods in here, mainly all eastern hemlock. And so when we're working on these projects, and the one thing that's always stressed to us from our supervisor is it's more important to think about what you're keeping than what you're taking away, and it is completely true. So we really have to think a lot about the important components that we want to maintain on the landscape. And so knowing that these softwood pockets in here are a small portion of this area that we're managing, we know that these are really important to keep in here. One, for diversity, because there's not a lot of representation of these softwoods in here, so we want to keep them anyway for that seed source to continue that progeny of those important components. Two, hemlock provides a lot of cover. This you can see is really shaded in here. It's on a north-facing slope. It's a lot of thermal cover, especially as it's getting hot. Wildlife such as moose can bed in here. You provide perching sites for birds, nesting sites. Hemlock is a really good foraging tree for a lot of different bird species in here as well. But we also wind up keeping all the other trees that are in here in this group that you would see in like a natural disturbance event, where you could have a pocket that would be retained, that wouldn't be touched or wouldn't be blown over by the wind itself. And these areas really make ideal locations, because also you can also see the dead wood in here. We have a dead snag over here, which is great foraging. It's also great habitat for cavities for woodpeckers, and then secondary cavity nesters such as flying squirrels that will use those. And then as that tree falls and hits the ground, it will continue to provide more habitat as it slowly decomposes into the ground. We also have down dead logs that are over here too as well. So when I'm looking at things to retain, this has all the components ideally that we would want to keep on this landscape during this